Good evening and welcome to the January 15 meeting of the Master Plan Implementation Committee meeting. There's a fair amount of work to do. We're short-handed, but I'm sure we can move through the major components of the agenda. And on that note, I'd like to ask Mike to lead us in the pledge of allegiance.
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I believe the first order of business, Marion can confirm this, that we're going to discuss the current status and try to see if our group here is at least agreeable to the final status of the roadmap plan for the revitalization of the common. And I take it everyone's had a chance to at least look at it, go through it, and make any comments. I think only minor corrections can be made at this point, or no corrections at all.
If there are some corrections, I'm happy to request them.
Okay.
Presuming we can make a few tweaks if necessary.
Yeah, so what I want to do basically is get the okay from our group here to distribute this with an accompanying note to as many different relevant committees, which most of them in town. And that's what I'm after for this particular. And I would take that vote to mean, or that agreement to mean, that in general we think this is a useful, if not necessarily perfect document. So do I hear a motion to do that, to accept it as a committee and to distribute it?
Does anybody have any discussion they want to engage in prior? I'm fine with it, moving forward with it as it's currently construed.
Okay. Yeah. Cool.
Yep, we did have one comment from Jonathan on wording of one of the historic pieces, and I'll request that change. It wasn't a change, it wasn't a major change, a sentence or
Yeah.
two.
I don't know if this is relevant to the discussion or not, because we start messing around with the tables, but I do not consider the potential partner listings that are provided in the matrix at the very beginning to be the definitive ones necessarily, that we can move those around depending on the interests and availability of the talent and time to work on these. So these are suggestions about who should be working on what. Some of them are more obvious than others. I just want to make that clear that these may change over time. Any other further discussion?
All right. I make a motion that we accept the Littleton Common Revitalization Roadmap and Plan in its current form and ready it for release to various town departments and boards.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So be it. Thank you very much. The next topic is, all right, the next step is, didn't leave me any notes. The next step is the zoning code. The reason I'm turning to this is because if you look at the plan, the roadmap, the most immediate and impactful thing that we could do is to get to the zoning and get through it in a, shall we say, a reasonably rapid but nonetheless complete fashion as possible. So there are several issues surrounding doing the code for the Littleton Common. It has two parts. One is by contract. The Fort Point Group had agreed to go over and detect any rules for the town, any regulations for the town code that were out of compliance with federal and or state law. And as far as I know, that has not yet been completed. And I think Mara would be the first one to see that if it had been.
I haven't seen anything on that.
Okay. So we need to get that from them for sure. The second is the actual preparation of the code, which we agreed we would pursue form-based code. However, in spite of our effort to, shall we say, engage properly with Fort Point, several issues have arisen having to do with management of the project, management of the resources available on their part, and how they would allocate the resources that would be available to them if we went ahead and deployed them as the contractor of choice to do it, to do the work on form-based code. So I'll start off with some comments by mainly Maren, who, at our request, has looked at the current budget and how it was managed or not. And Maren, do you want to briefly describe your summary of your experience?
Sure. Let's see, the piece of work that's left to do is some of the zoning, and look forward to that. Looking at the bills that we have today, I don't remember the number, $16,000 remaining, but they have not billed yet for December work, which was producing the final roadmap that you saw online. So there's not, I'm very concerned that there's enough money left to do the work that's within the current contract. I haven't received the quarterly reports that should have forwarded to the grant authority. So that piece is missing. And then we're continuing to see bills that reflect items that have already been 100% paid out. So it's, I've asked for a resolution on that.
Well, my main concern is here we are at the end, and the contractor has apparently not disciplined themselves to the point of being able to complete the work under the budget. So this concerns me because the town doesn't have and should not be expected to keep pouring money if the contractor can't stay within the bounds, because this was priced out to include this kind of service. And secondly, we're moving on to a different kind of coding, so if we are not satisfied with using or deploying them as the major contractor for it, we should have enough left, as it were, however small it is, to add to the 42,000 that we do have on reserve separately for work to be done on form-based code. The effort to find, in parallel with considering the shall we say, the results that have been obtained so far from Fort Point, in a parallel effort, we've tried to identify, and I think we've reasonably successful identifying maybe as many as 2 alternative possible contractors who could carry out the form-based work for us. One of them I know has extensive experience using it, familiar with the New England approach to form-based code and towns like ours, and the other one we're just, I think Maren probably knows a little more about it than we do at this point, but by the 25th of this month, we should be getting the first, shall we say, preview, I'll call it a preview document from a group called Principal Group that may be appropriate for us to consider as one of the 2 to take over. In the meantime, I will engage in discussions with Fort Point to try to understand their proposal and to bend it more to what our experience and what we're after is more closely reflected in the event that we're unable to, as it were, reach a satisfactory resolution either with them or with other contractors.
And honestly, the things I really like about Fort Point was when we did get the deliverables, to me, they looked to be very, very well done.
Yes.
And on point and what we asked for. And Fort Point has agreed to do, or has a proposal to do the form-based code for the amount of funds we have available.
Right.
Principal Group, in discussions with them, I mean, we'll wait till we get their proposal, but they would be looking for additional funding.
Yeah, almost double, I think. Yeah, double would be the number. So I think that we would have to basically, take a risk. And we haven't talked to the other party, so we don't know what the story might be.
Right, and then we always have the opportunity to directly contract with form-based code specialist and design specialist and take on the management.
Okay.
So when are we going to discuss those other options?
Well, we receive the preview proposal from Principal Group on the 25th of this month.
Right.
We have just made contact with a second source. And until, I guess, further conversations are had to see whether or not they're interested, it will be probably at least, I would say, another 3 weeks before we know where we're at. And I will keep everyone informed and try to avoid making preemptive decisions without having a meeting with all of us together. Because I want you all to hear what's transpiring.
There's 2 questions. Are we striving for Springtown meeting to potentially present?
Sorry.
No? Okay, good, that's fine. Then that gives us, plenty of time to, do it right.
Well-
Right, since we didn't start in November or December, we
Right.
weren't gonna make Springtown
Yeah, that's
meeting
fine.
with the zoning bylaw.
That's what I thought. I just want to make sure. And then, in terms of potentially subcontracting out this work and acting as our own project manager, what's the viability, do we have I'm not asking for specifics, but a rough idea of the viability of that in terms of the availability of subcontractors that are familiar with form-based code and planning around it? Is there a plethora of, because it seems, yeah.
2 or 3.
Right, so,
2 or 3 that are recommended.
okay.
All right, let me
I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves,
No,
I'm just curious.
Let me give you the thinking behind the notion here of taking more responsibility as a committee for overseeing and doing things.
Well, I'm not opposed to it by any degree. I'm just curious as to, if I thought that there were 50
Right.
consultants to choose from, that's one thing. If there's 3, it's just edification for me at this point.
Okay.
I'm not pro or con either way.
Okay.
I guess I'm more concerned that if there's only 3, they might turn around and go, yeah, I'm busy, I'll do it, but because I'm busy, I'm gonna, charge you my top dollar price for it, versus if there were 50 and there's competition out there, I'm more confident that from an economic perspective and our funding perspective, that it's a viable option. And I just don't wanna chase
Yeah.
it down only to find out that it wasn't viable at all because of the lack of competition and the cost and everything, et cetera, and say, well, I don't think it's gonna take that much time to make that determination, but I was just
Yeah,
curious. as to-
I think I have a feeling by the 25th of this month, we're going to know
All right.
what ballgame we're in. However, that doesn't change the fact that there's a good possibility that the amount of money that we have available to do this without applying for, or if we apply for a grant and not get it, or whatever mechanism we use to supplement the 42,000, that there are 2 large components, not just preparing the code and doing the preliminary design work and then doing the code that goes along with it, but right in the middle of all this is the very important interacting with the community and running those, shall we say, events, and collecting the information and inputting it so that both the designer and the regulator, as it were, the person who writes this, can reflect that in the work. And I think that the organization of the outreach and making it happen is going to depend largely on us, in contrast to what's been done in the past, where we lean heavily on the consultant to be the one that, as it were, designs and carries out the bulk of the work to meet the public. So that's the thinking there. It's primarily both shall we say, conservation of resources in the face of what we're looking at, in part due to the fact there are only n number of people who can write this stuff, and not all of them are necessarily great at outreach. Which brings me now to taking a look at, if it's okay, to take a look at the way in which resources have been allocated by the proposed budget in Fort Point's proposal. And I want to bring your attention to the line item that refers specifically to the person, I think his name is Barton, who's doing the actual drafting. And you'll notice, as compared to, basically would be Julie running the operation, and she's at the very top of the sheet, you will notice that there's a lot more money devoted to that than there is to the design, in which I see Mr. Tim Love as being far, would be the person probably in 2 or 3 sessions, given the information he already has, to be able to come up with the fundamental, shall we say, concept design that drives the actual writing of the form-based code. So I'd like to get some input from our group here about, do they see the allocation as proposed by Fort Point to be suitable for the purpose in your own mind, your view, or should we change it, make suggestions to changes, and what should those changes be?
Are you referring to the budget at the back of the proposal?
The final page.
Yep.
Trying to put the puzzle together here. Okay, so this is, so the writing, regulating, planning, graphics, code refinements, drafting, and final draft internal review, that's 3 line items. It's $11,600, $3,020, $2,120. That adds up to the bulk of this $13,800 by Mr. Bartman, correct?
Correct.
That's the way you're looking at it?
Yep.
And then the public workshops
Yep.
and meetings with the town department are around 6,000. And are you saying, are you positing that we should redistribute that?
Yeah, this is my concern, and I'm just putting it out there.
Right.
I'm putting it out there because of looking back on how some of the public forums are held, and in particular this instance. And I'm particularly interested in, and this is my confessed bias, I'm particularly interested in getting a little more time and money from Mr. Love, mainly because his ability to capture on paper, even if he's not physically present, able to capture on paper the design concepts that underlie the regulation.
Have you met this Mr. Love prior to my joining in June? I don't have any familiarity with him.
He was present, yes, well, you did not meet him because we engaged Forest Point, I believe, before you joined.
Okay.
Number two, he was at the meeting, at the first public event.
When I was in Canada. Okay. The only thing that surprises me here is that the environmental planner is only 20 hours. I don't have anything else to compare those to be perfectly honest, but this isn't alarming to me. I
Okay.
just would not be surprised if the environmental planner had more work to do, but maybe that's being covered by other aspects of what we're doing with the town, downtown plan.
So it's workshop prep, and then it's one public hearing, is that what we're saying?
That's what it looks like to me. It looks like one public hearing, which
One hour meeting?
yeah, which strikes me as being.
So it says,
about-
well, it says public workshops 2,
Yeah, that's,
and it says 4,480, and then there's like, and it says prep as a note. And then okay, so that's the public workshops, and then there's a hearing to present the
draft.
Yeah, I got it.
So have we already had the 2 public workshops in?
No, then we would
this is-
have-
This
This
is
is
a new
still to
contract.
come.
This is totally
Right.
new.
Okay.
This is- We're starting from,
Well, I mean, what do you want, do you want 3 public workshops, or, I mean, I guess what, typically when we did the master plan update, and then when we went through the town common revitalization, we had public forums, and they were well-attended, and we got a lot of input, but then the digesting of that came back to us, and we had opportunities to go through an iterative process with and that's what I see in this writing,
Correct.
in the regulating, and the code refinements, and the drafting. I see that being an iterative process where we, as the representatives of the community, are going to double check, triple check, make sure that the vision that is coming from the consultant mirrors what we saw and what we hope they clearly understood from the public outreach. You know,
Right, there are two pieces to this. One is the one you mentioned, and that is, does it fulfill what the public has in mind? I want to just use that as the reflection of the success, or relative success of the design, the overall design. So picture, I hate to be trite here, but picture West Concord, West Acton. Okay, just picture West Acton with a nice twist to it, and whatever that twist is, all right? So that's the design effort. And that's where I think Mr. Love comes in, okay? Then there's a second piece, which I'll just say, it's writing regulations and making sure that they are in conformance with what regulations should be in order for them to be enforced. And that happens to be in the bailiwick of Marin and people for the planning board. Okay, because simply having a design is not sufficient. It's got to conform in both the diagrams and sketches and graphics associated with it, as well as the text, with state as well as town requirements. So our input, or I'll call them the non-planning part of our committee, say the three of us, are going to be, as it were, scrutinizing, does this fit what the town is looking for? And it's going to take a slightly different kind of expertise to make sure that the work gets done effectively in draft form. And by the way, it has to still arrive at the doorstep of the planning board that holds hearings, maybe more than one or two, and we've already seen on something as, shall we say, not exactly straightforward as targeted housing for elderly go through N number of things, that if they weren't rescued by one of our compatriots over here, I don't know where that would be today. So there's two parts of this, and I just want to be clear that, make sure that everyone here is comfortable with the way they've allocated, and try to get your opinion and have a discussion with Julie, because it could very well be that what she's got here, or what they have here, makes sense, and or not. Marion, what's your view? You've been through I think you and Anna both, from different perspectives, have been through these wars, so I'd like to get your perspectives.
It surprised me that actually writing the code was such a small piece of the overall work that Julie has outlined. Just because I've been involved with writing other types of code, but then I realized that has always been the focus of the effort, was just the words. So I was really glad to hear that you had input on how the proposal is laid out. To me, I needed to hear the question, if, the bulk of if the contract is 42 and we're paying 8 to 13 for just the writing, is that the right ratio?
Are you concerned it's not enough, or you think we don't have enough devoted to public effort? I'm trying to...
Sorry. I was concerned that it wasn't enough.
For public...
For just the code writing.
For the code
part of
writing,
it.
was not enough.
Yeah.
Okay. Anna, what do you think?
Well, as with the work that we did that you and Mike did to create the original RFP for the revitalization work that went out to bid, it was very thoughtful in terms of what we as the town wanted to see happen in that work and the outcome of that work. We have not necessarily talked about that as a group to really identify what it is that we want to get out of the form-based coding. We are being reactive to what it is that Port Point has given to us. So I don't know that I can really assess whether or not the numbers and the number of hours that they've given us are correct in terms of what we would expect to see. We now have a set budget of $42,000. And so to some degree it becomes, so what do we expect to get from that, rather than expecting a complete something, but in reality, maybe we can only get a part of the whole. So I think that that's part of why I'm having difficulty with doing that, is I don't know that we've really identified as a group what it is that we expect to get out.
I believe the thrust of this is that we're looking for the original impetus for all of this is to have identified the strengths and weaknesses of the existing regulations affecting the common, and how, in view of the revitalization, if any, they need to be changed, upgraded, otherwise. So, to the extent, so the Fort Point gave us a report in which they pointed out not only specific changes in line with the revitalization view, which is, let's say, it's a version of scenario 3. They changed a number of things having to do with, shall we say, standard Euclidean positioning. What they suggested in addition to this was a specification of what things should look like and including specifying, shall we say, the spatial arrangement of structures that would replace or be rebuilt from scratch in the common.
I'll push back on the
Go ahead.
first part of that. The zoning diagnostic, which is what you described at first,
Right.
we're supposed to have that under the current contract from Fort Point Associates.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
the revitalization scenarios have suggested changes that are not specifically form-based code suggestions. They're specific changes to how we do parking and offsets and things like that. And we could just stop right there, make some, and we could get, probably for a significant less amount of money than this, get someone to write that for us in a way that we could then present it to the planning board, that they could accept and present it to town meeting, and we'd be done. But when we were going through the process, we then were, the potential of form-based code was presented to us, and now we've bitten off a bigger piece of the apple, because now the goal will still be to come to the planning board with a set of zoning bylaw changes, potential changes, that they will hopefully accept and be willing to bring forward to town meeting, because that's their purview. And, the question is through this process is, what exactly as a community are we going to ask for in terms of defining how we want to implement, assuming that we do want to implement form-based code, what exactly do we want our form-based code to look like that may be different from West Concord versus different than West Acton, different than Pomona, California, I don't know, wherever else they do form-based code.
Okay.
So, and I don't know that we're qualified to truly make this determination, just looking at the budget and saying, well, I'm not comfortable with only, a third of the cost going for public outreach and 40% of the cost, I'm making up numbers, going towards the writing. I assume that they think that that's what they need to do to make it work within the budget that we gave them. I would be more concerned that we didn't give them enough budget to, and I think this somebody alluded to this a moment ago, that we may not have given them a budget that is going to be sufficient for us to put forth a solid effort to reap the potential benefit of form-based code. And if we're not, then we either need to put more money in, get them to honestly tell us, what is this going to cost to do this the right way? And there can be debate about, well, you want to give us the Cadillac, we certainly don't want the Corolla, but maybe we could settle for something in between. So that's fine if we're going to have that discussion, but I don't think we're qualified to make that determination just looking at this budget to say, I'm not comfortable with the public outreach proportion relative to the writing proportion. We have to push them on that and ask them why they made it like that, and is there room for, if we ask for more public outreach within the current budget, and that means that we have to sacrifice some of the effort towards writing and graphics and things like that, where's our risk? You know, I mean, I think we have to have a dialogue. I don't think we can I don't think we should go back to them and say, we're not quite happy, we want more public outreach, and we don't think you need to spend that much on writing it. They would know, right?
They would have a point of view, I guess. My only point in doing this is to have this discussion that we're having tonight, so that when we do begin the discussion with Fort Point, which I plan to do, that I can put to them, where do you see this going? What is the output from this? How much of this is why is it the proportion that you presented to us? Why is that more effective? What's the basis?
I think that's a perfectly reasonable question to ask.
Okay. And the reason that we have not put it to them up here, the reason we haven't put it up to them yet is simply because I want to be clear that I need one more tool in my toolbox to discuss with them, and that is if I much rather have Fort Point do a first-rate job of what Fort Point can really do very well. And that may include merely helping us get ready for public outreach, and we pick up the hours and the effort to have the public outreach. In other words, what I'm looking for is, I'm not looking to reduce the amount of effort spent on anything. I want to find out if there's anything that we as a, shall we say, as the interface between this effort and the town, is there enough there for us to do that would make a significant impact on the total budget so we get a better quality of work out of it? That's what I'm trying to find out. But first of all, I have to ask the question,
Right.
the first primary question, and that is, where does this get us?
I mean, I would be very wary of us running a public meeting that's designed to get input on how we want to implement form-based code, because we are not planning experts, we've never written it. In terms of organizing the time, the location, the publicity, the materials to get people enthusiastic, get the community enthusiastic and get the turnout, sure, we can do that. I'm sure we could do that. But we've done it enough times now that I'm not that worried about that. But in terms of actually running the meeting, that's still got to be the consultant.
Okay.
Because they're going to ask the right questions. They're going to be able to, if the conversation is going away from form-based code on details that are irrelevant, they can rein it. We wouldn't be able to do that. I don't think so.
I'm just looking, what our assignment would be, I don't know. I just want to make sure that we have an avenue open just in case. All right, I'll pursue that with Julie,
Yeah.
and that might change the nature of the conversation. Is that agreeable? Good. Okay, I'll do that. Okay. Thank you very much. That's very helpful. The next item is one of our more difficult ones, and that is informing and listing other boards and committees to take up revitalization roadmap tasks. And I have just listed here a few of the usual suspects. The part of the informing will be the distribution of the roadmap, and the other piece of it would be explaining or amplifying. Now, I'll be giving updates that will include this, but by and large, I want to make sure that we have people on the ground at these meetings of these particular committees to give them an idea of where we're heading. Because some of them are fairly important and need to be started now, even because they have, if you looked at the roadmap, both common sense and the roadmap tell you that we've got to start now on some of these sooner rather than later. It's just that the form-based or doing the regulation has to start right away because it precedes anything new that comes on the commons, new or redeveloped. Okay, so what I've done is there are 4 committees here, 4 committees and commissions that are listed here. It's not exhaustive, all right? The Board of Selectmen is very obvious, the Planning Board very obvious. The new one on the list that has not been engaged to the extent that I think they could be is economic development. Fortunately for us, because it has long lead times and a fair amount of expertise required, the Transportation Task Force, led by one of our alumni, is probably more advanced than anyone else is. And I think that they're very much aware of what's coming in general terms, and I think once they peruse the roadmap, since I know they've attended the meetings, they're familiar with what's going on, there are no surprises here. It's just a lot of effort, both for here and with interacting with the state with regard to crosswalks, traffic calming, transportation, places for bicycles to park, much less move, the whole galaxy of shall we say, components that have to do with transportation. The other piece of this, which involves both the planning board and the board of selectmen, as well as now other committees devoted to housing, of course, is housing and how the space in the common is being used. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because the notion, without housing, I think most of us have come to realize, without some degree of housing in the common, it will not be the neighborhood that I think the community is looking for. It will, in other words, without people living there, regardless of age, diversification, all we have is the potential for creating another strip. So the idea here, we're trying to encourage and support housing in the common, consistent with the aims and policies set by the requisite boards and other committees that are devoted to, shall we say, addressing the housing issues in town. Now, so therefore, I am trying under C to basically have us approach politely but firmly these committees. Some require more work than others. To me, the one that I think needs to be approached and encouraged greatly would be the Economic Development Committee. And I'm assuming here that people who had either prior business experience, understand what it means to create enterprise opportunities in a community, who've had experience in doing that are going to find this assignment interesting and challenging. So unfortunately, Megan Ford, who has a business in town as well, very visible, she would be one kind of person I would ask to undertake this assignment, but she's not here. So I feel free to assign her that temporarily. And Lyle, I wanted to ask you, and I'm also thinking here of doing more than one thing. I mean, I'm wondering, would you be at all interested in assisting in approaching, not because I'm thinking of succession and also the fact that sooner or later we're not going to have Anna here because you're going to be on the planning board but not at Mpic. That probably the likelihood. That's going to come around May. And just to get you up to speed, as it were, I'm looking to you to work with Anna on approaching the planning board, engaging with them about not just the coding effort we're doing, but the overall, the thrust of the major components of the plan. Because if you look at the matrix, you see the planning board has, of course, a major role.
I think that would make some logical sense. So to the extent of my ability, and I won't know until I do it, I'm willing to pursue that and report back.
Okay. So Mike has business experience, lots of it.
You do?
Yeah. You're working for a company, aren't you?
Yeah.
And you're very nice to your boss.
I'm just a hired gun.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So when you looked at the matrix, which ones of the assignment in the matrix did you find that struck you as something where you could, shall we say, encourage and promote?
I didn't specifically identify anything that I felt I was any more adept at than anybody else on the committee, so I'm willing to, if you've got two people on the Economic Development Committee liaison, then I think that's sufficient. And I'm more than happy to interface with the Board of Selectmen or the Planning Board as you see fit, whatever you want. That's fine.
Okay. I was thinking that it would be very useful for you to supplement whatever little I could do with the Board of Selectmen.
That's fine.
Okay? And I think that if
I
both
know
of us...
those guys.
Huh?
I know those guys.
Yeah, that's some, well, as we know them now, I mean, they're going to change.
True that.
And also, there's a new administrator, so there's another, there will be hopefully a new administrator before the end of the month. Is that the idea? So there's a fair amount of, hello, and here's what's been going on.
Yep, yep.
So when you work together, you're on, it's or your own task force, as it were, Lyle, so you understand there's no, you guys decide how you want to handle. But the main idea is take a look at the matrix and see the jobs.
Okay.
What it is that has to be done in the common. And patience and persistence is your byword here, because we're looking at stuff that's going to take a while.
Yeah.
Just because if we're very lucky and the sewer gets started more or less on schedule, it'll still be years before we see a lot of, shall we say, new construction occurring in the common. I don't care how good form-based code is, it'll still take a while for folks to do it. And let me say one other comment, in that it's important, based on what we've heard from, and the other piece that you want to look at is the impact, the economic impact section. The reason I'm talking about this is because, unlike in the past where we weren't sure where we should be hunting, as it were, what kinds of things we should be hunting in terms of businesses in town and the kind of jobs that might be created, that area of economic development. This roadmap contains very solid information based on real market data. So it's not a random walk. You've got very specific targets for pop-ups, for outreach, going into Boston, and basically invading, having Littleton invade other commercial centers where we can induce restaurants and other kinds of businesses to take a look at Littleton, because you might be surprised how many people don't know about Littleton.
Oh, sounds engaging.
So a plan to reach out. And the other piece of this is looking for and trying to get outside funds, which includes, what does the state have for economic development? Who in town can help identify those opportunities? And number two, I know I stand ready, and I think Mike Fontanelle stand ready to assist in the preparation if you need it for any grant proposals.
Thank you.
Okay, now, under D, and I'll let's see, I guess, do you want to contact Megan? Is that the idea, Lyle?
Under D, do I want
No,
No,
for your
just
side.
circle back.
I'm sorry to circle back. Or do you want me to give her the good news?
What?
That's okay,
I'm not
okay.
with you, sorry.
Megan's not here, so
Yeah.
who's gonna reach out to Megan to let her know she got assigned to work with you, to work with the Economic Development Committee?
Sorry.
It's okay, it's me.
I was wrapping my head around
Yes.
what I was supposed to be doing,
Yeah.
so that's one of the things. I'm
That's
supposed to be
fine.
doing.
Why
I
don't you just review what assignments we each got? Just to make
Okay.
sure we're all.
You and Lyle are going to be handling primarily the planning board
Yeah.
and zoning. And housing, to the extent that the planning board finally takes an interest in the prospects for that in the common. Okay?
Yep.
And you have another assignment, which is economic development, which you're sharing with Megan.
Thank you. I completely missed that.
That's okay.
And I will
That's the
seek
outreach.
to catch up with Megan,
Right.
which I think I can do in the foreseeable future.
Sure. And I realize that for everyone, this is not an easy thing to undertake, given your schedule. You have a day job and a night job, and this has now been added to your burden, so that's why I'm giving you at least 2 weeks lead time.
Right.
Okay. Okay. All right. After providing those liaison assignments, I just wanted to make clear that in giving this the thought, I asked the question, does the common need its own implementation committee? That meant that there was, that, given all the different moving parts that are within the common, to make the common revitalization real, have a chance. Given the role of what I call public works, whether it's roads, water, there isn't a component in town that is missing from this. Do we think that there ought to be yet another group that takes overall responsibility for what we're doing? Or do we wait to see how each aspect of the project develops? For example, Soaring has its own task force, they're pursuing it. Transportation, I'm sure, has established contact with all the relevant town components. So I think when the jobs have to be done because a development is going forward, it's a natural thing for the folks who are involved to become involved. So I just want to make sure that you realize, I did give some thought to the idea of maybe there should be an oversight for the whole thing, because we'd be like the master, shall we say, supervisor. I don't know if we're there yet.
I'll be back.
I don't think that's necessarily a bad idea, but I don't think it's our purview to make that determination. I mean, I think we could certainly ask the selectmen to convene a meeting where all the groups you just cited sit down to make that determination together.
Yep.
And if the answer is yes, how that would be,
Beautiful.
constructed and where the responsibilities lie and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, thanks.
I mean, I would like to believe that they're thinking along those lines anyway, because there's enough momentum and enough, I don't want to say disconnected, but there's enough disparate efforts going on that maybe some efficiencies of scale can be achieved if we all get together and come up with one overarching viewpoint. But that's just my opinion about that. But
Yeah,
I really
I-
do think it's selectmen that
Yeah, I mean,
drive that.
there's so much, shall we say, above-ground engineering involved in this. It's interesting.
And I also think there's dominoes that have to fall before that type of group could even get, because the idea of an implementation committee, from a strategic point of view, that's one thing, but another way to think of it is, I think the way you're thinking about it is, well, we've already come up with a strategic vision, it's going forward, now how do we make sure that everything gets done correctly? That's another aspect of the responsibility, so that all
That's why
needs to get hashed out.
I'd like to take this over the Board of Selectmen, because it involves budget as well, and rethinking of that. Okay, moving on to capital B. It is my understanding that the ever-active Council on Aging has, shall we say, taken renewed or continued interest in the possibility of occupying a still vacant 23,000 square foot building on Great Road, right in the middle of the common, I'll call it. And it's available for purchase if the town sees fit to do so. I don't think from my perspective, and walking through it or seeing it, even when I saw the video, it was clear to me that some renovation would have to be done. I'm not going to get into the policy issue of whether or not this ought to be multi-generational or maybe for seniors, but at least it's an existing building that, if purchased, could serve the community very well in either one or both of those functions. And that's one of the major priorities that we're, as I said, under task number 35, had a very high rating for at the way it's worded in the master plan. It was intergenerational, multi-generational, excuse me. There's no such thing as multi-generational community center. So I just want to make sure that that all of us were aware that this effort has been revived again, and many folks who earlier were scratching their heads are now thinking it might be a good idea after all. Okay. So I think that I'm certainly going to do what I can to encourage it, but it is a budgetary as well as a set of policy decisions that have to be made.
I mean, I think any of us can make our own determinations about, because we're we're interested citizens, right? We're
Sure.
on certain boards and committees. But I think our charge is to make sure, like, it's good from this perspective, that effort of evaluating a potential site for that,
Yes.
whether or not that site, the community ultimately decides that's the right solution to this particular goal of the master plan, we really shouldn't be making that determination. It's a potential, and the community will decide, because it's a multifaceted issue, cost, location,
Yeah.
viability, et cetera, et cetera. And then I think our role would be that if for some reason it falls by the wayside, then we have to pick it up and say, okay, well, you said no to that for decent reasons, what are you gonna do instead? Because it's still a priority, even if that particular solution goes by the board for whatever number of reasons, potential reasons.
Yeah, the reason I grasped onto this as secondary is because we also talked about housing in the entities.
Right.
And this is and this is another, as it were, component
Sure.
that would make it very attractive.
Yeah.
And it's
Right.
a little bit cheaper than, shall we say, taking all the asbestos out of the walls. Okay. All right, so I'll be keeping an eye on that, and I now hear that Mike will too, so that we'll have the two mics watching. Okay, land use. I'll confess that there is, at the moment, nothing in the master plan that I think is explicit about land use. It refers to it in two different ways. There's several, I would say at least 6 or 7 top priority items that have to do with housing. And then there's at least 3 or 4 directly, maybe more, and I just choose not to be too Talmudic about it, but having to do with what we'll call, quote, open space or undeveloped. And I've been trying to take a somewhat different, to have our group take not a different view necessarily, but a view that might be a little bit more constructive moving forward. Fortunately for us, we're arriving on the scene with this very top priority item at a good time, because at the moment, I've been informed that you've got the circular, Keith Ruth, one of the residents who's always been interested in, I'll just say, land use, has brought to our attention a particular meeting, which I think is being held, let's see, February 13th, thank you, in Acton, because Acton apparently has been wrestling with this for quite a while. And Acton, I do understand, is a different town, different distribution of open and closed and economics, and we have a whole list of things. We are not Acton. But it would be very useful to have one of us at least attending this. Is there anyone, I mean, to me, this is a natural component for the planning board to be aware of.
Yeah, 3 to 5 p.m. I'm already signed up for it. And
Then we're covered. Thank you very much, Maren.
Absolutely.
That's great. That will-
I've been watching it get put together, so it's been
Okay.
exciting to see.
Just to your point about, it is in Acton,
But
and
it's-
it might be somewhat Acton-centric, but looking at the speakers, there's a speaker on new entry sustainable farming, there's a speaker, a senior planner from Framingham, the assessor from Framingham, a conservation planner from Stowe. So it's not, I don't think it's only going to
Oh, yeah.
be specific to Acton, I think it's general concepts. I'm gonna be out of town, so I'm not gonna go, but,
I think we're going to get a treasure trove of info from Maren on her. The thinking I've had on this is that Littleton has been basically, I'll use the term opportunistic, and not organized in its approach to either one of the major aspects of land use. And that's because obviously the major aspect of land use that interferes with any systematic controlled approach is the fact that most land is privately owned, and owners can do whatever.
within the zoning.
Yeah, within the zoning. So I took a perspective more, asking the question, what could Littleton do in terms of designing the town? Because we're small, our population has a limit, as long as you keep along our boundaries, has a limit. And I'm going back to, I guess, I don't know if it's the 50s or the 60s, but there are limits to growth, and there is the tragedy of the common. So, and I don't mean our common, there's a tragedy of the common. So I was hoping that there would be an approach that where we would approach this from a neighborhood or area by area part of Littleton and take a design point of view. And that is, what can we do with respect to undeveloped space, if there is any, and housing together that makes a coherent, livable place, a place. And I'll just stop there. That was the idea behind the idea of bringing, can we, for the first time, break through the notion of we have housing over here and open space over here, bring them together and realize we're really talking about welfare of the town. And these things work together. The town is meant for people, that's housing. The town is meant for people, that means a certain, shall we say, sense of place, which means we don't necessarily have to emulate Somerville, but what does it mean to be Littleton? What is that mix? And there is a summit that's scheduled for March the 12th. That's being put on by the Littleton Affordable Housing Trust. And at this point, I'd like to ask Bartlett to sort of, if you could, just brief us on what you know or what you think is going to be happening at that summit.
Which is,
And by the way, this is not a random walk here. He's chairman of the trustees of this group.
Well, I'm not that well informed about it because I don't pay attention, but I think the idea is just to try, as you've been saying, to get all the players that are involved in the housing issue together at one time and place to talk about what we as a housing trust can do or should do or are directed to do by the other bodies in town. And also try to find out what, from sort of as an ongoing process, what we can do from other people who have housing trusts and how they make them work.
What, is everyone here familiar with what a housing trust is?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, okay. So, from your perspective, there is the Affordable Housing Trust is concerned with housing, which is obviously not necessarily land use, except to the extent that it affects housing.
Well, speaking for myself, I see those issues as very closely intertwined, and I feel very strongly about concentrating housing in village centers, leaving as much open space open as possible. I don't know how to do that, but I think the open space is one of the major things that defines people's sense of what Littleton is. So, developing the common the way you were talking about with housing and mixed use, and potentially finding a couple of other places around town to develop in a similar way. But we are kind of, we have to be kind of opportunistic. What kinds of properties are going to come up? Who's going to be willing to work with us? And how do we guide that? If somebody buys a farm over in the boondocks, and how do we get them to build in the common instead? I don't know how we can do that.
I think you think of what your favorite. It's the raising of the funds, finding the funds to buy the land, which is a very expensive proposition. And this is
Well, I see the trust. I mean, we do have some money, but it's limited, and we can use it as seed money or as a way to influence somebody's decisions by sweetening the pot a little bit within our means. But we have approximately, we will, when the CPC meets, I hope, approximately $500,000.
Yeah.
Which can be useful, I think.
Looking ahead, are we to be meeting together on March 12th?
That, to the moment, that's what's being contemplated.
Do we know, is this an evening meeting? Because we're scheduled to meet that night, that day anyway, aren't we?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this summit would either be in lieu of that?
It'll be either part of it or in lieu of that, yeah.
Gotcha,
I'm
okay.
not gonna
All
have
right.
two meetings.
So I don't have to change my schedule yet?
No, not yet.
Okay,
Not
all right,
yet.
very
I'm
good.
trying to spare you
All
that.
right,
'cause
thank you. I'm just gonna put my phone down then.
Well, it's a dating game, so be careful to do that.
If we were gonna do it, I would have to get it in there now before I forget. All right, good.
Okay. All right, and I'm sorry you missed the commentary from, but I know you've been working very hard on housing. And I have this on our list of land use, not because I think Mpic has the luxury of being able to cover all these things, shall we say, with equal fervor. I mean, we have limited resources, to say the least. However, I'd like to identify as many different, make sure we know who the various players are. This is why the summit interests me a lot, because that has at least the mechanism of bringing together all the, shall we say, major players, at least for the housing aspect of it. So my question is, are people who are very interested in what you just mentioned as a personal interest on your part about, you said one of the things that defines Littleton is basically farm and open space. And one of the ways, of course, to keep open space and farms available is to support farmers and to keep them on the land, as it were. But I do understand the realities behind that. So is there any, shall we say, any reason or for bringing, shall we say, the interests on the part of folks who have a particular interest in, who are in committees and organizations that are interested in, shall we say, looking at undeveloped land and keeping it, as it were, as part of the sense of place that Littleton is? So are they included in the group? They're going to be at the summit, or is it mainly housing?
No, I think we were focusing on housing as opposed to conservation groups or groups.
Okay.
People who want to preserve what's already owned. We were talking about the mechanism of keeping space open that isn't protected, it's privately owned, and how
Yeah.
we influence those people.
Okay. Okay. So I'm not going to, we're not going to undertake this quite yet, okay? But sooner or later, we're going to have to bring these two components from being any further separated, because it's not just a matter of, they're two separate things. There are a lot of other changes going on that are going to affect Littleton in the next 20 years almost for sure. One of them I strongly suspect is climate change. I don't know which direction it's going to go into. The other thing is economics. We're going to be still suffering from, shall we say, the structure of wealth in town. And the third thing is that the long-term effect of our population shift. It's getting older, which raises the question of what is the economic viability to sustain the town just for being able to do what it can. How do we make ourselves more attractive to younger folks, to bend the curve, as it were, so it doesn't deflect all the way to elders who have gray hair and stuff like that? Right, Bartley? Keep chuckling. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll come back to this, but when we have, shall we say, when we have some of the other items on here already further along. But I just want to make sure that we are aware.
Good.
I do have a question. Bartlett, for the summit on March 12th, who else besides Mpic is invited to that event?
Gosh, I don't remember this COA. I think the selectmen, I don't know, honestly, all the people that we talked about.
I assume that you have planning board there.
Yeah, Mark is on our trustees, so he's invited, his group is invited.
His
Lisa
group,
will be
you
there
mean?
from the Housing Authority, which is
Okay.
different.
Okay. So that about, okay. And the other part of it is that, and I'm not trying to get your meeting going, but have you talked at all to experienced developers?
No, I mean, I went to a meeting at Devon's a couple months ago, but we haven't talked to anybody in particular. I mean, we're still in the process of figuring out what our goals are and how we want to, what would be our most favorite way to proceed.
And free advertisement for the master plan committee, all right? Alumni sitting here too, and that is there's an incredible amount of information about housing, land, where it is, what types, all the rest that are in that master plan. You will know that. You were on this committee, you've seen it.
Right.
So take.
We're both alums of the.
Yes, I know, we have,
original
we're
master plan.
embarrassment of riches here.
All right.
We
thank
miss you both, by the way. I mean, you can see we're very shorthanded. Hint. Anyway, public input. Anything?
Yeah, I had a few things. I saw I'm trying to keep up on the agendas, and I saw that I saw TAC was on the agenda for tonight, so I thought I'd pop in. So I did comment on the document. I haven't been able to check in the last couple of months. So the roadmap and the plan, particularly, where is that at right now? You guys are still waiting for the revised version, is that correct?
Except for small typos, it's ready to go. We voted tonight to start distributing it.
Oh, okay, great.
So, if you want an advance copy, I'll make sure you have
That'd be
access
good.
to one.
That'd be good. I have our next meeting on Thursday afternoon, and so I wanted to give Titchik an update as to where things are at with what's going on with the common thing, because I do hope to have us be a player somewhat with that, but since we are only an advisory council, we are just a conglomeration of other committees that all have interest in transportation, but mostly a clearinghouse. I don't see us so much as an action group, but more of an advisory group type of thing. But if there's things that are particularly you looking for us to do, then I'd be curious to know what those things are, so I could bring those up. And there is a meeting or a future meeting.
There is in the plan, just to answer your question in
Okay.
part, there is in the roadmap, at the very beginning, a list of things to be done along with a schedule.
Okay.
It looks out over quite a number of years, but nonetheless, but I think I made a short list of all the transportation items that are in there. So as far as I know, that's right up your alley.
Okay, great.
So getting them started now is important, and anything you can do to encourage the relevant committees to begin the process of asking the question, okay, if we're going to have traffic slowing, calming, what would that look like? What should that look like in the common? What do we have to know to do it? What does the state have to agree to? Because you're working with the thorny thing about having two state roads, Great Road especially.
Yeah, I see the DPW playing most of the heavy lift on that for
They
that
need
kind
to-
of thing. But
they
in terms
need to
of, what does the town want to see, then I think we could be a good voice for that,
Yes.
because we are the ones conglomeration of those things. I don't see us probably doing lifting when it comes to like negotiating with the state per se or something like that. But at least having Mr. started here, what our opinions are would be, I think, is what our role would be.
The plan does go through the list of things. If we want the common to be revitalized along the lines suggested, not necessarily with a full build-out, traffic, bike paths, all safety, the feedback we got in our sessions, and you probably were there for that, is that people are very concerned about some of these basic as getting across the street.
Yes.
Alive.
Yes, there's the proviso, okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yes. And then the other point that we had when the last meeting we had, just to give you some feedback, related to the master plan discussions we've had in the past, there are 9 items, I think, that are related specifically to transportation. And we talked about what are the things that we want to prioritize among the transportation items that are in the master plan. And there was, like you'd expect, a mixed results. The senior elder housing people want to focus on the senior services and transportation. The traffic was an issue and things like that, and the bicycle access. But it was, one of the members recommended, well, there's a lot of different transportation issues, and maybe we should have like a master plan related to transportation specifically, as a way of kind of like racking and stacking the transportation type of issues. And it made me pause and think about it, and I'm trying to figure out how we would do that. If we did want to come to the different town bodies, like you guys did with the, like you did with the common plan, you kind of said, hey, this is something that no one's doing,
Right.
how do we go do that? I'm looking at possibly, okay, what would be the steps necessary to do something like that, to basically put a mini plan, or master plan related specifically to transportation issues, which I think are already kind of captured in there, but it doesn't have a lot of, meat on the bones in the master plan. It's more like just general goals. I see them as goals and some particular things.
Yeah.
And as a way of kind of taking that into a more defined, like, roadmap as to these are the things we want to see accomplished over a certain period of time.
Well, first of all.
And the common's a big part of it too. Obviously, I understand the common is a big, the common,
Yeah.
the transportation station, the common, but it's almost its own animal. I see it because it's so interrelated between all different parts.
Yeah, well, that would be, my suggestion is to take a look at the current roadmap for the common, only because you will see the stacked list in transportation, all of which I'm sure with which you're very familiar.
Are you thinking that might be, we might just get busy with that, and that might be more than we can probably?
I would say that if you could accomplish, 10 or 20% of what's in there within the next 5 to 10 years, that would be quite an achievement.
Well,
For the town, for
yeah,
the whole town.
no, I get that, but I also don't want to ignore the services for the elderly, which I think is a real issue in this town, and that's been. Everyone gets focused on infrastructure, and they don't really focus on services, so I want to see if we can address those issues.
When you say services for the elderly, just what do you mean? What is
Well,
that?
the fact that the several services that we currently have for elderly, for getting them from places is pretty taxed out right now, and it's heavily in demand, and they can't provide enough of that support. And we want people to stay in Littleton. That's a real issue in this town.
Okay.
And so I'm hoping to have further discussions with Mr. Chiak about what those needs are and just how bad that situation is.
To give you an idea, there is a projection that since roads in general, this is another discussion, roads in general and road maintenance is not economically sustainable. 495, 128, Turnpike and all that, there's a lifetime on those, and it's sucking. So modes of transportation are going to be changing, and it's possible, I wouldn't say it solves the problem, it makes the problem even harder to address because of the changes that are occurring. And if you're talking about crosstown transportation, this will tax, it's the seniors we have in mind, it's the younger people, it's people who don't want to drive into the common. So I'm just saying, this is a laboratory almost, it's like an instance of the problem. So
Sure.
it's a good place. The other thing to do, very frankly, if you can make a case for a master plan for the town to approach it, the other thing to do is there's a whole, as you'll see from the material, there's a whole center that the state runs. I think it's at the Mpic Center in Cambridge.
That's US DOT.
Okay, but one or both of them maintain information sources and funding sources for transportation. And I just find that sometimes money talks.
Oh, sure. Like
That's
a
it.
grant, yeah.
Yep.
Anna, you had a comment?
I do. So I would actually recommend going through the roadmap once you
Yeah.
get that. I also wanted to ask if you had watched or see you there on Monday night at the Board of Selectmen meeting when the TIF was.
I meant to go to that meeting yesterday, I totally forgot about it.
That's okay. So you will be happy to know that the master plan was invoked in the sense of saying that what they were planning on doing on Foster is essentially coming from the master plan. So that's great to hear. Bike lane, pedestrian lane,
Yep.
all that kind of good stuff. And then at some point, obviously, there's going to be more transportation that in a different phase that they're hoping to extend it to Harwood and,
Yep.
It goes on and on. So I definitely see that there could be a need. What I would recommend is if you wanted to, because you are a visionary in this, in the sense of being able to bring together the the various groups to talk about the transportation needs. And so with that, if you could put your ideas down on paper again, 1-2-page proposal in terms of what you would envision, at least then it gets people talking, because putting it down on paper solidifies things a little bit and lets us know what your thinking is, and maybe other TAC members if they want to work with you on it, and then, you know, come back and rediscuss it, because I think that it does have value in terms of all the different areas of town that have transportation needs.
Okay.
Let me just
That
say,
would be my thought.
that you have an open invitation to come to any of our, any.
You're not gonna have Barry got at the go door?
No, no, what I want to arrange is make sure that you get notices each and every time, and you get done with follow-up letters from me to make sure, to encourage you to come. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
No donuts even necessary, it's okay.
Oh, no, it's part of the game.
Thank you.
Anything else from the public? Okay. I didn't mean to skip members, but here's a chance.
Being at this end of the table, should we get going?
Sure.
My finger on the pulse of the town, and very much looking forward to and being somewhat excited about form-based code coming to town. Might as well put it on the record tonight. I would be remiss if I did not say, if we did not have our act together before Northern Bank pulled the trigger on what they're going to do, that would be a horrible shame, and we would all be remiss to have something built that didn't fit what we're designing. So far as my role and ability here and being part of this whole vision, we need to get ahead of that, whatever we need to do. If that involves going to talk to chairman of Northern Bank, you know, I could do that, but I want to be sure that we're getting our work.
You just put, yeah, the thing is, if we get the consultants on board, they're one of the first three that
Yeah.
I'd have a chat with, because they're a major stakeholder along with a few others.
They showed up at our public workshop. They're at least paying attention and listening, but we got to make sure that our
We
folks
have,
are green.
it's face to face. I mean, I think you know that. It's got to be
Yeah.
personal.
Yep,
Hey,
that's
Mike?
my big one.
Mike, anything? Good. Anna?
Update, so a couple of things. Did you all talk about the multi-generational senior center?
We did.
Okay.
We talked about it in general terms. We said that we were glad to see there's reactivation of interest in a building on Great Road, and we were not going to get to the policy issue. It should be seniors only or not.
Right, so I do know that a week ago, there was a meeting right here with seniors talking about
Yes.
that particular topic. I don't know what the outcome was of
They,
that.
yeah, they went for a visit they did a tour accompanied by an architect. Or, no, someone who has basically a plan for the building. They walked around with that. And they had a meeting in which they discussed, they're not clear yet, they don't quite yet got to the point that for them to really function there, we're going to need a modern sewer system to support that building, because without it, it's not a senior center. It's going to be too constrained. So,
Okay.
I was curious, sorry to interrupt, what
Sure.
building are they considering?
it's the old
DCU.
DCU building.
Oh, okay,
It's still on the market, it's not mysteriously, but it's still on the market.
got it, okay, thank you.
Related to,
Does that help?
yes, thank you. Related to my work on the planning board, we're currently seeing a lot of applications, and some of them have been put off till next month, so that we can have a fifth member present. We are currently going to be interviewing candidates to be able to appoint somebody on January 28th, so that hopefully that individual can come on board for the months of February, March, April, May, until a new person can actually be elected to that particular role. So in terms of housing. We are still looking at a couple of different applicants for senior residential housing on the previous bylaws.
Previous bylaw.
On the previous bylaws, yes. So I think that's it.
Draft minutes.
Realized that I didn't get these draft minutes to you before, ahead of time. Sorry about that, but
Well,
we can hold them till next time if you wish.
would you like to take the responsibility? I hate to burden you further. Could you take a look and see if there's anything here that needs to be drastically corrected? Annotated.
It looks fine to me.
Not drastically, but my name appearing on the bottom of page 1, polling is the kind with 2 L's. I'm not poking. And we might add the 2 words may be to conclude the sentence. Other than that, I'm satisfied.
Happy to make those changes.
Do I hear a motion for any further discussion about the minutes?
Well, I haven't read them, so
Oh, I'm sorry.
do you seriously want me to sit here and read them?
Just trying to spare you.
You just want to push it to the next
Can
meeting?
also
Anna?
default.
Yeah, let's just push it to the next.
I'm going to push it to the next meeting.
Sure. There's no reason to.
Not in a reason to rush.
Unfortunately, it will not open the government. All right, our next meeting is February the 12th at this room. And please circle March the 12th, which may be at the fire department, and we have to praise for that. So we'll be going back here April the 9th to the police department. And just so you know that the reason that our meeting was not posted publicly in the usual time, go ahead.
It was up there today.
Yes, I saw that, but and in order to ensure, I will show you, maybe even get the agenda even sooner to make sure that we get, so far I've been on time, it's just that sometimes things don't go well with the posting. That is on the website. So do I hear a motion for adjournment?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much.